learned what monsters look like when they share your last name. Tonight, you will hear everything. And when the sun rises, they won't call it family business. They'll call it a crime. My name is Elizabeth. I'm 67 years old. And what happened on my 40th wedding anniversary will haunt me forever. It was supposed to be the happiest day of my golden years. Instead, my daughter-in-law Sarah looked me straight in the eyes and said, "You should thank us, we haven't thrown you out yet." But that wasn't the beginning of my nightmare. That was just when I finally understood what my son Marcus and his wife had been planning all along. Let me tell you how a perfect family can hide the most twisted secrets. Because what I discovered about my own son would make your blood run cold. For 4 decades, Robert and I built what everyone in Millbrook called the ideal marriage. Our colonial house on Maple Street was the kind neighbors envied white picket fence that Robert painted every spring. Rose garden that I tended with religious devotion. Sunday barbecues that brought the whole community together around our mahogany dining table. Robert worked as a bank manager at First National for 37 years. Steady and reliable as sunrise. Every morning at 6:47 a.m., he'd kiss my forehead, straighten his navy tie, and drive his sensible Toyota to work. I taught 3rd grade at Jefferson Elementary for 32 years. Watching generations of children learn to read under the alphabet border I'd hung in 1987. Every evening, we'd sit on our porch swing that creaked in exactly the same spot, planning weekend trips to the lake house we'd saved 15 years to buy. That little cabin on Lake Morrison was our sanctuary. Robert would fish while I read mystery novels. And we'd spend hours talking about our dreams for retirement. "Lizzie," Robert would say, using the nickname he'd given me on our first date, "we're the luckiest people alive. We have everything we ever wanted." We had one son, Marcus, born when I was 28 after 3 heartbreaking miscarriages. He was everything we dreamed of: honor roll student every semester. Star quarterback who led Millbrook High to the state championships. The boy who helped elderly neighbors with their groceries without being asked. Marcus had Robert's steady brown eyes and my stubborn chin. He was tall, athletic, with the kind of confident smile that made teachers and coaches believe he could do anything. And for the first 28 years of his life, I believed it too. "Mom, you and Dad are my heroes," he used to say, especially during his college years when he'd call home every Sunday night. "I want a marriage just like yours someday. I want to love someone the way you love each other." Those words used to make my heart swell with pride. Now they make me sick. Marcus graduated from State University with honors, then Northwestern Law School with a specialty in estate planning. "I want to help families protect their assets," he'd told us. The irony wasn't lost on me later. When Marcus brought Sarah home 5 years ago, I welcomed her like the daughter I never had. She was beautiful, petite, with honey blonde hair and green eyes that sparkled when she laughed. She seemed to adore our family traditions, eagerly helping with holiday preparations and learning my grandmother's secret pie recipes. "Elizabeth, you've raised the most wonderful man," she'd tell me, her small hands helping knead dough in our kitchen. "I hope I can be half the wife you've been to Robert." She called me Elizabeth, never Mom, but I didn't mind. Some people need time to warm up to family intimacy, and I was patient. I remembered how nervous I'd been meeting Robert's parents 43 years ago. Their wedding was magical. St. Mary's, cathedral filled with white roses and baby's breath, the church where Robert and I had married, where Marcus had been baptized. Robert walked Sarah down the aisle when her father couldn't make it. He died in a car accident when she was 16. She'd explained tearfully. I helped her into her dress that morning, a stunning ivory gown with pearl buttons that had belonged to her grandmother. Tears of joy streamed down my face as I fastened those tiny buttons. "We're so lucky to have you as our mother-in-law," she whispered that day, squeezing my hands. "Marcus always says you're the strongest woman he knows." The reception was perfect. Marcus's best man toasted the couple who proved that fairy tale love exists. Sarah's maid of honor talked about how much Sarah had been looking forward to becoming part of such a loving family. For 2 years they seemed blissfully happy. Sarah would bring homemade cookies when they visited, always remembering that Robert preferred oatmeal raisin. Marcus would help with yard work, joking with his father about the proper way to prune roses. They rented a charming apartment downtown, and Sarah worked as a dental hygienist while Marcus built his law practice. Every holiday, every birthday, every family gathering, they were there with genuine smiles and thoughtful gifts. But the first crack in their perfect facade appeared 6 months ago. The day after Robert's 71st birthday, Robert started showing signs of what the doctors called mild cognitive impairment. Shortly after turning 71, nothing dramatic at first: forgotten appointments, repeated questions, confusion about which day of the week it was. Dr. Henderson, our family physician for 20 years, said it was normal aging, manageable with medication and consistent routines. Some people experience memory issues, he'd explained during Robert's annual checkup. It doesn't necessarily mean dementia. We'll monitor it closely. Robert blushed at the lapses. He hated it. This was a man who had memorized every customer's account number at the bank, who never missed an anniversary or birthday, who could recite poetry he'd learned in high school. Lizzie, I feel like my mind is playing tricks on me, he'd confess when he'd ask me the same question twice in an hour. It's okay, sweetheart, I'd reassure him. We all forget things. It doesn't change who you are. But I was worried. I started keeping a detailed calendar, writing down medications, appointments, important dates. One researched memory exercises, brain-healthy recipes, anything that might help. That's when Marcus and Sarah's visits became more frequent and more focused. They'd arrive every Sunday after church, which seemed sweet at first. Sarah would bring flowers, and Marcus would check our smoke detectors, test our security system, make sure everything was safe and functional. Mom, Dad's symptoms are progressing faster than Dr. Henderson indicated, Marcus said during one of their visits, his voice taking on what I now recognize as a calculated concern. I've been doing research, and mild cognitive impairment can deteriorate rapidly. Sarah nodded, her pretty face arranged in sympathetic lines. Elizabeth, we're so worried about you. This house is enormous: 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, that big basement workshop. The maintenance alone must be overwhelming. I insisted we were managing fine. Robert had good days and bad days, but we developed systems. Pill organizers, written reminders, consistent routines. We'd been taking care of each other for 4 decades. We weren't about to give up now. You're being unrealistic. Mom, Marcus's tone changed, becoming sharper, more authoritative. What if Dad wanders off in the middle of the night? What if he forgets to turn off the stove? What if he falls down those steep basement stairs? You could both die in an accident that could have been prevented. His words were like ice water in my veins. The way he said, you could both die, with such clinical detachment, should have been my first warning. But I was still thinking like a mother who loved her son, not a potential victim who needed to protect herself from him. We're being careful, I said. Dr. Henderson says Robert's condition is stable. We have medical alert systems, and Mrs. Patterson next door checks on us daily. Sarah and Marcus exchanged a look that I caught but didn't understand at the time. Now I know it was frustration that their first attempt at manipulation had failed. Elizabeth, you're not thinking clearly about this situation, Sarah said, her voice taking on a patronizing tone I'd never heard before. You're 67 years old. Robert is 71. Neither of you should be living alone in a house this size with his condition deteriorating. Asterisk. The way she said deteriorating made it sound like Robert was dying, not dealing with normal age-related memory issues. That night, after they left, I found Sarah in our kitchen at 2 a.m. I'd gotten up for a glass of water and found her sitting at our breakfast table with a stack of papers spread in front of her. Sarah? What are you doing down here? She looked up without the slightest trace of embarrassment or surprise. I couldn't sleep, so I thought I'd help organize your financial documents. You know, make sure everything's in order. The papers were our bank statements, insurance policies, property tax records, investment portfolios documents I kept in a locked filing cabinet in Robert's study. How did you get these? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Marcus gave me the key, she said smoothly. He's worried about your record keeping, Elizabeth. Some of these bills are overdue, And there are discrepancies in your accounts that need attention. I knew our bills weren't overdue. I'd always been meticulous about finances, paying everything ahead of schedule. And I certainly hadn't given Marcus a key to our filing cabinet. I think I can handle our personal finances, I said, gathering the papers protectively. Sarah's smile didn't reach her eyes. Of course you can. I was just trying to help. Marcus and I want to make sure you're not overwhelmed by all the details. The chill in her voice should have been a 5-alarm warning. But I was still thinking like a mother-in-law who wanted to maintain family harmony, not a woman who needed to protect herself from financial predators. The next morning, I checked our filing cabinet. When I saw those scratches, a small, sharp voice in my head whispered, "Someone has been inside our life without our permission." When I confronted Marcus about it, he had a perfectly reasonable explanation. Marcus put a hand on my shoulder. "Mom, you asked me for those insurance papers last week when Dad had that dizzy spell. Don't you remember? You were worried about coverage for his medications." "I didn't, Mom. Don't you remember?" "You were worried about coverage for his medications." The thing was, I couldn't remember asking him to do that. But Robert's condition had been making me more forgetful too, second-guessing myself constantly. Maybe I had asked Marcus to get those papers and just forgot. They didn't steal with shouts or threats. They stole by stealing my sense of truth. Our 40th wedding anniversary was October 15th, the same crisp autumn day we'd married in 1983. Robert had been having a good week. His medication seemed to be helping, and his confusion was minimal. 40 years with the most beautiful woman in Millbrook, he said that morning, bringing me coffee in the china cup he'd given me for our first anniversary. "I'm the luckiest man alive, Lizzie." Marcus and Sarah had insisted on taking us to dinner at Romano's, the Italian restaurant where Robert had proposed 43 years ago. It was supposed to be intimate, just family, celebrating 4 decades of love and commitment. Sarah wore a stunning black dress that probably cost more than our monthly grocery budget. Marcus looked handsome in his tailored suit, every inch the successful attorney. They seemed genuinely happy to celebrate with us. "To Mom and Dad," Marcus raised his wine glass, his voice warm with what sounded like genuine affection. "The couple who taught us what real love looks like. You've shown us that marriage isn't just about the good times, it's about commitment, loyalty, and putting family first." Sarah smiled, that perfect smile I'd grown to love. "You've given us so much, Elizabeth and Robert. Your wisdom, your support, your guidance. You've opened your home to us, shared your traditions, made me feel like part of the family from day one." Robert squeezed my hand across the table, his eyes still bright despite the confusion that came and went like clouds across the sun. "Best 40 years of my life, Lizzie. Here's to 40 more." We talked about our honeymoon in Niagara Falls, laughed about Marcus's childhood mishaps, planned a family vacation for the spring. Sarah seemed fascinated by our wedding album, asking detailed questions about relatives she'd never met. "Tell me about your cousin Helen," she said, pointing to a photo of my maid of honor. "Is she still alive?" "Helen passed away 3 years ago," I said. "Cancer." Sarah's eyes lit up with what I thought was sympathy but now recognized as something else entirely. "Oh, that's so sad. What about your brother William?" Marcus mentioned he lives in Florida now. "William died in 2019, I replied. "Heart attack." She was cataloging our family members, I realize now. Determining who was still alive, who might ask questions, who could interfere with their plans. But at the time, I thought she was just showing interest in family history. The dinner was lovely. We shared tiramisu and talked about the future. Marcus mentioned wanting to give us grandchildren soon. Sarah blushed prettily and said they were working on it. It wasn't until we returned home that the mask finally came off. "We need to talk," Marcus announced as we walked into our living room, his voice suddenly cold and businesslike. Sarah sat across from us on the sofa, no longer pretending to be the loving daughter-in-law. Her green eyes were calculating, predatory. "Elizabeth, Robert, we've been more than patient. More patient than most people would be in our situation." "Patient about what?" I asked, my heart beginning to race with inexplicable dread. "About your living situation," Marcus replied, his voice taking on the same tone he probably used with difficult clients. Dad's dementia is getting worse every week. You're 67 years old, Elizabeth. This arrangement simply cannot continue. I stared at my son, the boy I'd carried for 9 months, nursed through childhood illnesses, cheered for every football game, celebrated at graduation. What arrangement? Marcus, this is our home. We've lived here for 38 years, Sarah laughed, actually laughed. A cold, bitter sound that chilled my blood. Your home? Elizabeth, let's be brutally realistic here. You can't afford this place on Robert's pension and your teacher's retirement. The property taxes alone are $15,000 a year. The maintenance costs, utilities, insurance, you're bleeding money. We manage our finances just fine. You're barely surviving. Marcus interrupted, his voice harsh. Do you think we don't notice the unpaid bills stacking up on your kitchen counter? The credit card statements showing maximum balances? The late notices from the mortgage company? You're drowning in debt, Mom, and dragging Dad down with you. My blood ran cold. How did they know so much about our private finances? We weren't drowning in debt. We had some medical expenses from Robert's treatment, but nothing we couldn't handle. You've been going through our mail, I said, the realization hitting like a physical blow. Sarah shrugged without shame. Someone has to pay attention to reality. You're living in a fantasy world, Elizabeth. This house is going to bankrupt you. And then what? You'll lose everything anyway, but you'll have destroyed your credit and Robert's health in the process. The cruelty in her voice was breathtaking. This wasn't concern. It was calculated assessment. You should be grateful, Sarah continued. Her mask completely dropped now. You should thank us. We haven't thrown you out yet. We could have forced you into a nursing home months ago. The room seemed to tilt. Thrown us out? This is our house. Marcus pulled out a leather folder I'd never seen before, filled with legal documents. His expression was coldly professional, like he was handling a particularly distasteful business transaction. Actually, Mom, legally speaking, it's not your house anymore. Not since Dad signed the power of attorney papers 6 months ago. The world stopped. 6 months earlier. During one of Robert's confused episodes, Marcus had visited with a briefcase full of official-looking papers. He'd explained that they were protective measures for our financial security. Dad, with your memory issues, it's important to have legal safeguards, he'd said with such apparent concern. These documents ensure that if your condition worsens, someone can make decisions on your behalf. Robert had been having a particularly bad day, confused about what year it was, struggling to remember our neighbors' names. He'd seemed relieved that Marcus was handling complicated legal matters. Just sign here. Dad, Marcus had said, guiding Robert's shaky hand to multiple signature lines. This protects you and Mom from any financial mistakes or exploitation. I should have read those papers more carefully. I should have insisted on taking them to our own lawyer. But I trusted my son completely, and Robert was embarrassed by his confusion. He wanted the security of knowing our affairs were properly handled. What those papers actually did was transfer complete legal and financial control of our lives to Marcus and Sarah. Power of attorney. Doesn't give you ownership of our house, I said, my voice shaking. Marcus's smile was coldly triumphant. No, but the quitclaim deed Dad signed does. Along with the trust documents that transferred all your assets into a family trust managed by Sarah and me. Quitclaim deed? I whispered. Robert never signed a quitclaim deed. Actually, he did, Sarah said, pulling out photocopies. The paper had my husband's name on it, but the signature belonged to a man who didn't know what he was signing. Right here, properly notarized. Robert transferred ownership of this property to the Mitchell Family Trust, with Marcus as primary trustee and me as secondary trustee. I stared at Robert's signature on documents I'd never seen before. The handwriting looked shaky, uncertain, the signature of a confused man who didn't understand what he was signing. He didn't know what those papers meant, I said, my voice breaking. You took advantage of his condition. He was confused, disoriented. The notary public certified that Robert was of sound mind when he signed. Marcus interrupted. Dr. Henderson's medical notes from that week indicate Dad was having a particularly lucid period. Legally, the transfer is completely valid. Dr. Henderson had never said any such thing.
I would have remembered that. You're lying, I said.
Dr. Henderson would never have certified Robert is competent to make major financial decisions. Sarah's smile was venomous. Check the medical records. Marcus arranged for an independent physician to evaluate Robert's competency. Dr. Marcus Steinberg from the Cognitive Assessment Center downtown.
His report clearly states that Robert was mentally capable of making informed financial decisions.
I'd never heard of Dr. Steinberg or any cognitive assessment. When did this evaluation happen?
I demanded. The day you went to your sister Margaret's birthday party. Marcus replied smoothly.
Dad wasn't feeling well, so I took him to a specialist while you were away.
Just being thorough about his medical care. I remembered that day.
I'd driven 2 hours to Margaret's 70th birthday celebration.
Robert had seemed tired, so I'd suggested he stay home and rest. When I returned that evening, he seemed confused and mentioned that Marcus had taken him to see some doctors, but couldn't remember why. I'd assumed it was routine follow-up care.
I never imagined my son had used my absence to have Robert declared competent enough to sign away our entire life savings.
You manipulated a confused,
elderly man into signing documents he didn't understand,
I said, tears streaming down my face. You stole our home, our security, everything we worked for. Marcus leaned back in his chair, completely unmoved by my distress. We saved you from yourselves, Mom. You were making terrible financial decisions. Someone with business sense had to take control before you lost everything to poor judgment.
The casual cruelty of his words was staggering.
My own son had committed what was essentially legal theft,
and he was presenting it as a favor.
Robert, tell them.
I turned to my husband desperately.
Tell them you didn't understand what you were signing. But Robert was staring at the papers with growing confusion, his face pale and frightened. I don't remember signing these, he said slowly.
Lizzie, I don't remember any of this. Sarah's expression was smugly satisfied.
See? This is exactly why these legal protections were necessary. Robert can't even remember making these decisions. How could he possibly manage complex financial affairs? The trap was perfect. If Robert remembered signing the papers, it proved he was competent when he did it. If he didn't remember, it proved he needed legal guardianship. Either way,
Marcus and Sarah won.
We're not heartless, Marcus continued. We're allowing you to continue living here rent-free.
We could charge you fair market value, $2,800 a month, but we're family.
We're being generous. Generous. They'd stolen our home and were calling it generous to let us live in it. But there have to be some changes, Sarah added. This arrangement only works if you're both safe and properly supervised. The word supervised made my stomach clench. Over the following weeks, Marcus and Sarah's true intentions became crystal clear. They weren't just after our money. They wanted complete control over our lives. We've been researching assisted living facilities, Sarah announced during one of their now daily visits. Golden Years Manor has an excellent reputation and an opening in their memory care unit. Golden Years Manor was the nursing home where people went to die. The local newspaper had run a series of investigative articles about neglect, abuse, and suspicious deaths. The state health department had cited them multiple times for violations. We're not going anywhere, I said firmly.
Dr. Henderson says Robert's condition is manageable at home with proper support. Marcus's face hardened.
Dr. Henderson is old-fashioned.
We've consulted with specialists who disagree with his assessment.
What specialists?
Dr. Patricia Hoffman, the geriatric psychiatrist who evaluated Dad last month. Sarah replied smoothly.
Her report recommends immediate placement in a secure memory care facility. I'd never heard of Dr. Hoffman or any evaluation. When did this happen? I demanded. The afternoon you went grocery shopping, Marcus said. Dad had another one of his episodes, confused about where he was, asking for his mother, getting agitated when I tried to calm him down. I had to call emergency psychiatric services. This was completely untrue. Robert had never had an episode like that. His confusion was mild, manageable, never violent or dangerous. That never happened, I said. Robert has never been agitated or violent. Sarah pulled out a folder thick with official-looking documents. The police report says otherwise. Officer Martinez responded to a domestic disturbance call about an elderly man threatening his family members. Police report? I'd never seen any police at our house. This is fabricated, I said, my voice shaking with anger and fear. You're making this up. The hospital emergency room records confirm it, Marcus added. Dad was sedated and held for psychiatric evaluation for 6 hours. Dr. Hoffman's assessment was that he poses a danger to himself and others. None of this had happened. But when I called the hospital to check, they had records of Robert being treated in their psychiatric emergency department. Somehow, Marcus and Sarah had created a completely false medical history. We can't be responsible if something happens to him, Sarah said, her voice taking on the tone of reasonable concern. What if he has a violent episode and hurts you, Elizabeth? What if he wanders off and gets lost? What if he starts a fire because he forgets to turn off the stove? Robert looked between us with growing terror. In his lucid moments, he understood that something was very wrong, but couldn't grasp exactly what was happening. Lizzie, he whispered to me that night as we lay in bed. Are we in trouble? Marcus seems angry all the time now. And that doctor Sarah mentioned, I don't remember any doctor. I held him close, my heart breaking. We're going to be okay, sweetheart. I promise we're going to figure this out. But I was terrified. My son and daughter-in-law had somehow created false medical records, police reports, and psychiatric evaluations. They were systematically building a case to have us declared incompetent and institutionalized, and I had no idea how to fight back. While Marcus and Sarah continued their campaign to have us committed, I started paying closer attention to details that had previously escaped my notice. Small discrepancies that individually seemed meaningless but together painted a terrifying picture. The mail, for instance. We'd always received bank statements on the 15th of each month, but I hadn't seen one in weeks. When I asked Robert about it, he looked confused. Didn't Marcus pick up the mail yesterday? He asked. I thought I saw him at the mailbox. Marcus had indeed been collecting our mail, but he claimed he was just helping us organize important documents. When I asked to see our bank statements, he said they were being reviewed by our financial advisor. We didn't have a financial advisor. I started intercepting the mailman, checking for statements and bills that never made it to our kitchen counter. What I found made my blood run cold. Our checking account, which should have had nearly $47,000 from Robert's pension and my retirement savings, showed a balance of $1,247. Our savings account $89,000 we'd accumulated over decades of careful budgeting was completely empty. The statement showed systematic withdrawals over the past 6 months. Large amounts transferred to something called Mitchell Family Trust Management, LLC. Smaller amounts withdrawn as cash, always just under the $10,000 limit that would trigger federal reporting requirements. Marcus and Sarah hadn't just stolen our house. They'd been systematically draining our bank accounts, but that wasn't the worst discovery. While cleaning out Robert's desk, supposedly looking for our original house deed, I found a manila envelope hidden behind old insurance papers. Inside were documents that made my hands shake so violently I could barely read them. Life insurance policies. Massive policies, $500,000 on Robert, $750,000 on me. The applications were dated just 3 months ago, and they bore signatures that looked like ours, but which neither of us had ever made. Marcus and Sarah had forged our signatures on life insurance policies that would make them millionaires when we died. They hadn't just planned to take our life savings, they planned to take our lives. It was methodical. It was business. They wanted us dead. The nursing home wasn't the end goal, it was just the setting for our convenient deaths. I'd worked in education long enough to know how to research. Using the public library. Computers, I didn't want any internet searches tracked to our home. I spent days investigating Mitchell Family Trust Management, LLC. The company had been incorporated just 8 months ago, with Marcus as president and Sarah as vice president. According to the filing documents, their business was estate planning and elder care management. Elder care management. They'd created a business specifically for exploiting elderly people, but the insurance policies were what revealed their true timeline. The applications included detailed medical histories that had been falsified to make us appear sicker and more fragile than we actually were. Robert's application claimed he'd had 2 minor strokes, multiple falls, and progressive dementia with behavioral complications. My application listed a history of heart disease, diabetes, and early-stage Alzheimer's disease. None of this was true, but it would make our deaths seem natural and expected. The policies also had a contestability period. Clause insurance companies could investigate and deny claims for fraud, but only within the first 2 years of coverage. After 24 months, the policies were essentially uncontestable. Marcus and Sarah were planning to keep us alive, just long enough for the contestability period to expire, then arrange for our convenient deaths. I found more evidence of their planning in the most chilling place imaginable. Sarah's social media accounts. Using a fake Facebook profile, I was able to view her posts from the past year. Most were typical social media content: restaurant photos, vacation pictures, inspirational quotes about manifesting abundance and claiming what you deserve. But buried in her timeline were posts that made my skin crawl. 3 months ago. Some people just don't know when it's time to let go and make room for the next generation. Hashtag Blessed the patient. 6 weeks ago. Watching elderly people cling to independence they can't handle is honestly tragic. Sometimes love means making hard decisions for them. 2 weeks ago. Can't wait for our new chapter to begin. Some major life changes coming soon. Hashtag Best is yet to come. The emojis made it even more grotesque. She was documenting her plan to murder us with cheerful little hearts and celebration icons. But the most damning evidence was in her Pinterest boards. Sarah had created boards titled Dream Home Renovations, Luxury Travel, and Investment Properties. The photos showed million-dollar houses, European vacations, and expensive jewelry, all financially impossible on a dental hygienist's salary and a struggling attorney's income. Unless, of course, they inherited $1.25 million in life insurance payouts plus our house and remaining assets. She'd been planning our deaths since before the insurance policies were even approved. 3 days after discovering the insurance fraud, I pretended to take my usual evening medication and go to bed at 9 p.m. Instead, I crept to the top of our stairs and listened as Marcus and Sarah sat in our living room, discussing logistics. The Golden Years administrator thinks we can get them both admitted within the next 2 weeks, Sarah was saying, her voice casual and businesslike. I told her about Robert's increasingly aggressive episodes and Elizabeth's inability to cope with his care. What aggressive episodes? Marcus asked. The ones I'm going to document starting tomorrow. Sarah replied without hesitation. A few staged incidents, some photos of you with fake bruises, testimony from concerned neighbors about loud arguments and screaming. My son laughed. Actually laughed at the plan to frame his father for domestic violence. The neighbors will believe it, Marcus said. Mrs. Patterson has already mentioned that Dad seems different lately. People expect elderly men with dementia to become violent. Robert had never raised his voice to me in 40 years of marriage, let alone touched me in anger. But I realized that Marcus and Sarah had been systematically planting seeds of doubt about his behavior for months. Once they're in golden years, the timeline becomes much more flexible. Sarah continued. Elderly people with dementia die all the time in nursing homes. Medication errors, falls, choking incidents, sudden cardiac events. These things happen. What if the insurance company investigates? Marcus asked. They won't, Sarah said confidently. 2 years of consistent medical documentation showing progressive dementia and multiple health issues. Professional care facility with trained medical staff. Natural causes in an appropriate setting. It's textbook. I gripped the banister to keep from falling. They weren't just planning to institutionalize us. They were planning to murder us and make it look like natural deaths. The policies pay out within 30 days of death certification. Sarah continued.
Plus, we'll have full access to the trust assets immediately.
We're looking at nearly $2 million total. What about Elizabeth?
Marcus asked. She's been asking too many questions lately. I saw her going through Dad's papers last week. She's a confused old woman whose husband has dementia, Sarah replied dismissively. Who's going to believe her if she tries to cause trouble? Besides, once they're both in golden years, we control all their medications, all their visitors, all their communication with the outside world. The casual cruelty of their words was breathtaking. I was a confused old woman. Robert was a violent dementia patient. We weren't people to them, we were obstacles to overcome and assets to claim. If Elizabeth becomes a problem, Sarah added, we can always adjust her anxiety medication. A little extra lorazepam, and she'd be too sedated to cause trouble. Or we could document some aggressive episodes from her too. You're brilliant, Marcus said, and I heard the clink of wine glasses. By Christmas, we'll be rich and free. Rich and free. My son was planning to murder his parents for money, and he was celebrating with wine. I crept back to our bedroom, where Robert was sleeping peacefully, completely unaware that his son was planning his death. I spent the night staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out how to save us from our own family. The next morning, I knew Robert and I had to disappear before Marcus and Sarah could have us committed. But how do you hide from your own son when he has legal control over your finances, your medical care, and your legal identity? I started small and carefully. During my weekly grocery trips to Kroger, I would buy a small gift card along with our food, $20 here, $50 there. Nothing that would show up as suspicious on bank statements Marcus was monitoring. I told the cashiers they were gifts for teachers at my old school. Over 3 weeks, I accumulated nearly $800 in gift cards, which I converted to cash at various locations around town. I hid the money in places Marcus and Sarah would never look inside: old books, taped under drawer bottoms, sewn into the lining of my winter coats. I also started documenting everything. Using Robert's old tape recorder, the one he'd used for work presentations decades ago, I began recording our daily conversations with Marcus and Sarah. Their threats, their discussions of our deteriorating conditions. The hardest part was pretending everything was normal. Smiling when Sarah brought groceries we didn't need. Thanking Marcus when he reviewed our medical needs. Acting grateful for their concern while knowing they were planning our deaths. You're such good children, I told them one afternoon, the words tasting like poison in my mouth. Taking such wonderful care of us. Sarah preened at the compliment. We just want what's best for you both. Family takes care of family. Family takes care of family. Unless that family includes murderous children who see elderly parents as ATM machines, I contacted my sister Margaret, who lived 3 states away in Arizona. Without explaining the full situation, our phone was probably monitored. I asked if Robert and I could visit for a few weeks. Of course, Lizzie, she said immediately. You both sound like you could use some sunshine and relaxation. Stay as long as you want. But I needed more than a temporary escape. I needed evidence that would hold up in court. The breakthrough came when I discovered that Sarah had been documenting her own crimes. While pretending to help clean our house, Sarah often took photos for insurance purposes, or to show Marcus maintenance issues that needed attention. But she'd been using her phone to document far more than household problems. I discovered this by accident when she left her phone charging in our kitchen while using the bathroom. A text message notification popped up, and I saw it was from someone named Dr. Steinberg. The message read, Cognitive assessment report completed as discussed. Patient shows clear signs of advanced dementia and should be institutionalized immediately. Dr. Steinberg, the supposed cognitive specialist who had evaluated Robert. But Robert had never met any Dr. Steinberg, which meant Sarah was communicating with someone who was creating fake medical reports. When Sarah returned, I pretended I hadn't seen anything. But that night, I used our landline to call Dr. Marcus Steinberg at the Cognitive Assessment Center. The number went to a disconnected voicemail. The Cognitive Assessment Center didn't exist. Sarah had been paying someone to create false medical documentation. The entire medical history justifying our institutionalization
was fabricated. 2 days before our planned escape to Margaret's house, Marcus and Sarah made their move. They arrived at our house at 7 a.m. with 2 men in white uniforms carrying a stretcher. "Mom, Dad, we've made the arrangements with Golden Years," Marcus announced, his voice coldly professional. "The transport team is here to take you for evaluation. We're not going anywhere," I said, stepping protectively in front of Robert. Sarah held up official-looking papers. "This is a court order for emergency psychiatric commitment. Robert had another violent episode yesterday. He attacked Mrs. Patterson when she tried to bring you cookies. This was completely false. Mrs. Patterson was in Florida visiting her daughter. And Robert had spent yesterday afternoon peacefully reading in our garden. Show me that court order," I demanded. Marcus handed me documents that looked authentic, proper letterhead. Legal language, official stamps. But I noticed the judge's signature looked identical to Marcus's handwriting. "This is forged," I said. "The police disagree," Sarah replied. "And I heard sirens in our driveway." 2 officers came to our door, looking uncomfortable but determined. "Mrs. Mitchell, we have a court order to escort your husband to psychiatric evaluation. We understand he's been having violent episodes." "He's never been violent in his life," I protested. "This is all fabricated by my son and daughter-in-law. They're trying to steal our assets." The officers exchanged glances. One of them, Officer Reynolds, had been a student in my 3rd grade class 20 years ago. "Mrs. Mitchell, I know this is difficult, but we have to follow legal orders. The court has determined that Mr. Mitchell needs evaluation." "Tommy Reynolds," I said, using his childhood nickname. "You know Robert. You've seen us at church at town events. Has he ever seemed violent to you?" Officer Reynolds looked genuinely troubled. "Ma'am, I don't want to do this, but I have to follow orders." That's when Robert surprised everyone. In a moment of perfect clarity that cut through his usual confusion, he looked directly at Marcus and said, "You're not my son anymore." My son would never try to hurt his mother. The simplicity and dignity of his words stopped everyone cold. But Marcus was undeterred. "Dad, you're having another episode. These officers are here to help you." "I'm not having an episode," Robert replied firmly. "I'm having a moment of absolute clarity. And what I see clearly is that you've become someone I don't recognize." Officer Reynolds hesitated. "Sir, do you understand why we're here?" "I understand that my son has convinced you I'm dangerous," Robert said. "But I also understand that I've never hurt anyone in my 71 years of life, and I'm not going to start now." The transport team was growing impatient. "We need to proceed," one of them said. "We have other pickups scheduled." But something in Robert's calm dignity made Officer Reynolds pause. "Ma'am," he said to me, "do you have any evidence that these documents might be falsified?" I ran upstairs and grabbed my folder of recordings, bank statements, and insurance policies. "Everything you need is right here. My son has been systematically stealing our assets and creating false medical records to justify having us institutionalized." Officer Reynolds looked through the documents, his expression growing more troubled. "This is complicated. I think we need to call the detective division." Marcus's face went white. "Officers, my parents are clearly delusional. This is exactly the kind of paranoid behavior that demonstrates they need immediate psychiatric care." But Officer Reynolds had seen enough. Sir, I'm going to need you and your wife to come to the station for questioning while we sort this out." Sarah's mask finally slipped completely. "This is ridiculous," she screamed. "They're senile old people who can't take care of themselves. We're trying to help them." Her outburst confirmed everything Officer Reynolds needed to know about her true character. At the police station, Detective Morrison, a woman in her 50s who specialized in elder abuse cases, listened to our story with growing anger. "Mrs. Mitchell, what you're describing is one of the most sophisticated elder abuse schemes I've encountered," she said after reviewing our evidence. "If even half of this is accurate, your son and daughter-in-law have committed multiple felonies. We played her the recordings of their conversations about our deaths." She listened to Sarah discussing medication accidents and Marcus laughing about insurance payouts with an expression of disgusted amazement. "Do you have the original documents they used to transfer your assets?" I showed her the power of attorney papers, the quitclaim deed, the trust documents. Detective Morrison examined them carefully. These signatures were made under duress by someone with cognitive impairment, she concluded. And several of these notarizations look fraudulent. The dates don't match the notary's seal numbers. Within 6 hours, Detective Morrison had contacted the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, the State Insurance Commission, and the Adult Protective Services Division. Our case had become a multi-agency investigation. Mrs. Mitchell, I need to ask you a difficult question, Detective Morrison said. Are you and your husband willing to wear recording devices for a few days? If we can get your son and daughter-in-law to discuss their plans on tape, we'll have everything we need to arrest them. The thought of pretending to cooperate with Marcus and Sarah while secretly recording them was terrifying. But it was our only chance to stop them permanently. What if they realize we're recording? I asked. We'll have undercover officers monitoring you at all times, she assured us. If there's any sign of immediate danger, we'll intervene immediately. Robert squeezed my hand. Lizzie, we have to do this. Not just for us, but for other families they might hurt in the future. He was right. Marcus and Sarah's elder care management company was probably targeting other vulnerable elderly people. We had a responsibility to stop them. Detective Morrison arranged for Robert and me to return home as if nothing had happened. We told Marcus and Sarah that the psychiatric evaluation had been postponed due to paperwork issues, but that we were ready to cooperate with their recommendations. We've been thinking about what you said, I told them, wearing a wire that was recording every word. Maybe it is time to consider assisted living. We don't want to be a burden. Sarah's eyes lit up with predatory satisfaction. Oh, Elizabeth, I'm so glad you're being reasonable about this. Golden Years really is the best facility in the area. When would we move? Robert asked, playing his part perfectly. This week, Marcus replied immediately. I've already put down deposits for both of you. The sooner we get you settled, the better. That evening, they brought takeout Chinese food, supposedly a celebration of our decision to move to Golden Years. But I noticed Sarah being very careful about which containers she served us from. This orange chicken is delicious, she said, handing us specific plates. I got it from that new place on 5th Street. The food tasted strange, slightly bitter underneath the sweet sauce. I pretended to eat while actually moving food around my plate. Robert, following my lead, did the same. Within 30 minutes, I felt drowsy and disoriented. Robert was struggling to keep his eyes open. I realized in a cold instant, they had tried to make us disappear tonight. Are you feeling okay? Sarah asked with fake concern. You both look tired. We're fine, I mumbled, though I could barely form words. Just ... double quotes. Maybe you should go to bed early, Marcus suggested. Tomorrow's a big day. As we pretended to stumble upstairs, I heard Sarah whisper to Marcus, Perfect. By the time they wake up, they'll be too disoriented to resist transport. The recording device caught every word. Detective Morrison's team moved immediately. As Sarah and Marcus sat in our living room, probably congratulating themselves on successfully drugging us, federal agents surrounded our house. Marcus Mitchell and Sarah Mitchell, you're under arrest for elder abuse, financial fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, and attempted poisoning. The investigation revealed that Marcus and Sarah's crimes extended far beyond what they'd done to us. Their Mitchell Family Trust Management, LLC, had been targeting wealthy elderly clients for over 2 years. They would identify vulnerable seniors through Marcus's law practice, then systematically isolate them from family and friends while gaining legal control over their assets. 3 other families had been victimized, with losses totaling over $2.3 million. Most chillingly, 2 elderly clients had died under suspicious circumstances while in managed care facilities that Marcus and Sarah had recommended. Helen Bradshaw, 74, had died of medication interaction 6 months after signing her assets over to Marcus's management. Her daughter had tried to contest the will, but Marcus's documentation made Helen appear too incompetent to have family input on her care. George Patterson, 78, had died of accidental fall in his bathroom after transferring his $800,000 farm to Marcus's trust for estate planning purposes. George had been in perfect health before entering the transitional care facility Sarah had selected. The insurance payouts from both deaths had gone directly to Marcus and Sarah, who were listed as estate administrators and primary beneficiaries on policies the victims never knew existed. Robert and I weren't their first intended murder victims. We were just the first ones who figured out their plan in time. Detective Morrison showed us photos of Helen and George smiling, dignified elderly people who'd trusted the wrong attorney with their life savings and paid with their lives. How many others were there? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. We're investigating at least 12 suspicious deaths across 3 states, she replied grimly. Your son and daughter-in-law weren't just running a local scam. This was an interstate murder-for-profit operation. The trial began 8 months later and attracted national media attention. The family trust murders, as the press called it, became a cautionary tale about elder abuse and the vulnerability of seniors to financial predators. Marcus and Sarah were tried separately, each attempting to blame the other for the most serious crimes. But the evidence against both was overwhelming. They wanted our money. They wanted our lives. What they never understood was this: they could take everything, but not the truth. The recorded conversations were damning. Jury members visibly recoiled when they heard Sarah discussing medication accidents, and Marcus laughing about collecting insurance money from our deaths. The forensic evidence was equally compelling. Bank records showed systematic theft. Handwriting analysis proved document forgery. Digital forensics recovered deleted emails discussing client termination and asset liquidation. But the most powerful testimony came from the families of previous victims. Helen Bradshaw's daughter took the stand with tears streaming down her face. My mother was sharp as a tack until she started working with Mr. Mitchell. Within months, she was confused, frightened, and completely isolated from our family. When she died, I tried to get answers, but Mr. Mitchell said she'd specifically requested no contact with relatives due to our financial irresponsibility. George Patterson's son described similar experiences. Dad was healthy, independent, managing his own finances perfectly. Then Marcus Mitchell convinced him he needed professional asset management. 3 months later, Dad was dead, and everything he'd worked for belonged to strangers. The pattern was always the same: identify wealthy, isolated seniors, gain their trust through professional services, systematically isolate them from family, create false medical documentation of cognitive decline, transfer assets through fraudulent legal documents, then arrange for their deaths once the contestability periods expired. Marcus's defense attorney tried to argue that his client was a legitimate attorney providing estate planning services, and that any deaths were coincidental. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, he said, elderly people die. That's the reality of aging. My client cannot be held responsible for natural deaths that occurred while he was helping these families protect their assets. But Sarah's defense attorney had a different strategy: throw Marcus completely under the bus. Sarah Mitchell was a victim herself, her lawyer argued. A young woman manipulated by an experienced attorney who used her as an accomplice in his schemes. She was told these were legitimate business practices, legal ways to help elderly clients manage their affairs. The jury didn't buy either defense. The recorded evidence made it clear that both Marcus and Sarah were equal partners in planning and executing murders for money. Sarah's breakdown on the witness stand was particularly devastating. Under pressure from the prosecutor, she finally admitted the truth. It started small, she sobbed. Marcus said his parents had more money than they needed, that they were just going to leave it to charity anyway. He said we deserved it more because we were young and could use it productively. When did murder become part of the plan? The prosecutor asked. When we realized how much money there was, Sarah replied, her voice barely a whisper. The life insurance policies alone were worth over $1 million. Marcus said elderly people die in nursing homes all the time. No one would question it if his parents died of natural causes. Natural causes that you would arrange?
We researched which medications could cause heart attacks if given in higher doses. We studied which facilities had the highest mortality rates so the deaths would seem normal. We planned everything. The casual, businesslike way she described planning our murders was more chilling than any dramatic confession could have been. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a calculated business decision. Marcus was convicted on 17 federal charges, including conspiracy to commit murder, elder abuse, insurance fraud, mail fraud, and racketeering. Sarah was convicted on 14 charges as a co-conspirator. Both received life sentences. Without the possibility of parole. The legal victory felt hollow. Yes, Marcus and Sarah were in prison where they belonged. But the betrayal had damaged something fundamental in my understanding of family, trust, and love. Robert and I moved to a small apartment near Margaret in Arizona. The change of scenery was supposed to help us heal, but Robert's condition began declining more rapidly after the trial. The stress of discovering his son's betrayal seemed to accelerate his cognitive deterioration. I keep thinking, I failed as a father, he told me one evening as we watched the desert sunset from our tiny balcony. Where did I go wrong, Lizzie? How did I raise a son who could plan to murder his own parents? I didn't have answers. Marcus had seemed like a normal, loving child. There hadn't been warning signs of psychopathy or violent tendencies. He'd been popular, successful, charming, everything parents hope for in a son. Maybe evil isn't something you can see coming, I said. Maybe some people are just born without the capacity for genuine love, and they learn to fake it well enough to fool everyone. Robert's decline accelerated over the following months. Not from disease, but from heartbreak. The man who had trusted everyone, who had seen good in every person he met, couldn't reconcile himself to the reality that his own son had tried to kill him. I don't understand how someone can fake love for 30 years, he said during one of his clearer moments. Every hug, every I love you, every family celebration, was any of it real? The answer, based on what we learned during the trial, was no. Marcus had told a court-appointed psychiatrist that he'd viewed us as financial assets for most of his adult life. He'd maintained the appearance of a loving son because it gave him access to information about our finances and eventual inheritance. The love I thought we shared had been performance designed to position him for financial gain. Robert passed away quietly on a Tuesday morning in March, 2 years after the trial ended. He was sitting in his favorite chair, reading a mystery novel, when his heart simply stopped. The death certificate listed natural causes, but I knew he died of a broken heart. At his funeral, people kept saying how sorry they were about Marcus's betrayal. It must be so difficult, knowing your own son tried to hurt you, they'd whisper sympathetically, but they were wrong. The difficult part wasn't that Marcus had tried to hurt us. The difficult part was realizing that the son we'd loved for 43 years had never existed at all. Marcus writes to me from federal prison sometimes. The letters follow predictable patterns: anger, self-pity, manipulation, and occasional attempts at remorse that feel as calculated as everything else he ever said to me. His first letter, received 6 months after sentencing, was filled with rage. Mom, I hope you're satisfied. You destroyed your own son to protect money you were going to lose anyway. Dad's medical bills would have bankrupted you within 2 years. I was trying to save something for the family, and you chose strangers over your own child. The twisted logic was breathtaking. In Marcus's mind, he was the victim betrayed by ungrateful parents who refused to die conveniently. His second letter tried manipulation. I've been thinking about what happened, and I realize I made mistakes. I was desperate because of my business debts, and I made bad decisions. But I never would have actually hurt you. The plan was just to scare you into accepting help. I love you, Mom. I've always loved you. Lies, all of it. The recordings proved he'd been planning our deaths in detail. His most recent letter, arriving on what would have been our 45th wedding anniversary, attempted remorse. I found God in prison. Mom, I understand now that what I did was wrong. I'm sorry for hurting you and Dad. I'm sorry for betraying your trust. If you could find it in your heart to forgive me, maybe we could rebuild our relationship. I read every letter carefully, then file them away unread. Not because I'm cruel, but because I've learned to recognize manipulation. Marcus isn't sorry for what he did, he's sorry he got caught. Real remorse would include accepting responsibility without making excuses. Real remorse would include concern for his victims instead of self-pity. Real remorse wouldn't try to manipulate me into feeling guilty for his imprisonment. I've started volunteering with the Elder Justice Coalition, helping other seniors recognize and report financial abuse. The stories I hear are heartbreakingly familiar adult children who view aging parents as inconvenient obstacles to inheritance. Professional caregivers who systematically drain savings accounts. Con artists who target lonely widows with romance scams. The scope of elder abuse in America is staggering. Billions of dollars stolen every year. Thousands of vulnerable seniors victimized by people they trust. Most cases never reach trial because victims are too ashamed, too confused, or too dead to report them. I share our story at community centers, senior living facilities, and law enforcement training sessions. The audiences are always shocked by the sophistication of Marcus and Sarah's scheme, but I emphasize that most elder abuse is much simpler. Trust your instincts, I tell them. If someone is pressuring you to make quick financial decisions, if they're isolating you from family and friends, if they seem too interested in your assets, these are red flags. Real love is patient. Real care doesn't come with financial demands. The irony of Marcus and Sarah's crimes is that their greed ultimately cost them everything they thought they were gaining. When Robert and I updated our will after the trial, we left everything to charity. The house they'd tried to steal became a donation to the local domestic violence shelter. Our remaining savings went to the Elder Justice Coalition. The life insurance policies they'd forged were donated to a fund for elder abuse victims. Marcus and Sarah's attempt to inherit our wealth resulted in them inheriting nothing but prison sentences. But beyond the financial justice, there's a deeper satisfaction in knowing that our assets are now helping people instead of funding the luxury lifestyle of murderers. The domestic violence shelter uses our former home as transitional housing for women escaping abusive relationships. The bedrooms where I'd raised Marcus now shelter mothers and children fleeing dangerous situations. The living room where he'd planned our deaths now hosts support groups for trauma survivors. The Elder Justice Coalition uses our financial donations to fund legal representation for elderly victims of abuse. The kind of help Robert and I might not have been able to afford if we'd been less fortunate. Our money is still helping families, just not the family members who tried to kill us for it. I'm 72 now, living alone in a modest retirement community in Arizona. I have a small apartment with a view of the mountains, good neighbors who play bridge on Tuesday evenings, and a sense of peace I never thought I'd find again. The betrayal still hurts. I still have moments when I remember some sweet interaction with Marcus, teaching him to ride a bike, cheering at his football games, dancing with him at his wedding, and feel the sharp pain of realizing it was all performance. But I've learned that surviving betrayal doesn't mean forgetting the pain. It means choosing to build a new life despite the damage. If you take anything from my story, let it be this. Financial elder abuse is epidemic in America, and it often comes from the people victims trust most: adult children, professional caregivers, financial advisors. The victims are typically isolated, vulnerable, and ashamed to report the crimes. Trust your instincts. If someone is pressuring you to make quick decisions about your assets, if they're discouraging you from talking to other family members or advisors, if they seem overly interested in your financial situation, these are warning signs. Real love doesn't come with financial demands. Real care doesn't require you to sign over your independence. And if you're an adult child dealing with aging parents, remember that their money belongs to them, not to you. Your inheritance is whatever they choose to leave you, not whatever you think you deserve. Most importantly, remember that it's possible to survive even the most devastating betrayal. Justice exists. Help is available. And even at 67, even after losing everything you thought you knew about family, it's possible to build a meaningful new life. The truth, as terrible as it sometimes is, really can set you free. On quiet evenings, when I'm sitting on my small balcony watching the Arizona sunset, I sometimes think about that anniversary dinner where Sarah told me I should be grateful they hadn't thrown us out yet. She was right about one thing. I should be grateful. Not for their fake generosity, but for their arrogance. If they'd been smarter, more patient, less greedy, they might have succeeded. If Sarah hadn't been so cruel that night, if Marcus hadn't been so obvious about his financial desperation, if they'd waited longer before making their move, Robert and I might have died in that nursing home. If they'd waited longer before making their move, Robert and I might have died in that nursing home. And no one would have questioned their natural deaths. Their cruelty was their downfall. Their arrogance was their mistake. Their greed was their destruction. And their failure was my salvation. I survived because love, real love, not the performance Marcus gave us for 43 years, is stronger than greed. Robert and I had real love, and it gave us the strength to fight for each other when everything else was stripped away. I survived because truth, no matter how well hidden, eventually finds a way to surface. Marcus and Sarah's lies were elaborate, but they couldn't maintain the deception forever. I survived because justice, though sometimes slow, is stronger than corruption. Detective Morrison, Officer Reynolds, the prosecutors, the judges, people who didn't know us personally but believed that elderly people deserved protection, fought for us when we couldn't fight for ourselves. And I survived because hope, even in the darkest circumstances, is more powerful than despair. The boy I raised and loved for 43 years never existed. But the life I'm living now, surrounded by genuine friends, contributing to causes I believe in, using my experience to help others, this life is real. And it's more valuable than any inheritance Marcus and Sarah thought they could steal. The final truth is this: they took our money, our house, and our trust. But they couldn't take our dignity, our capacity for new love, or our ability to find meaning in survival. In the end, that made us richer than they could ever be. And that's a victory they can never steal from me. They thought our lives were just figures on a ledger. They were wrong. Truth came out, justice followed, and now our story protects others. If this moved you, remember, surviving betrayal is possible, and turning pain into purpose is the strongest kind of revenge. Tell me in the comments, have you ever suspected someone in your family? Your voice matters, your experience could save someone. Like, share, and subscribe for more stories.